Hey guys, welcome back to the homestead. So today for our canning madness, we're going to throw together a crowd favorite around here, which is the lamb stew. Now I find this one can be very versatile once you see the basic recipe, which I will put the full recipe below for you guys. But you can, if you don't like lamb, you can swap it out for beef or chicken, depending on what your personal preferences are for your meats. Now, with that being said, if you don't think you like lamb, check and see what type of lamb you're actually eating, whether it's a wool sheep versus a hair sheep, because I find personally for my taste, I don't like wool sheep as to where I do prefer hair sheep because apparently from my research I have found the lanolin in the wool sheep can actually cause a mutton flavor or a different flavor to the meat. So before you rule out lamb completely, maybe just check and see what type of lamb you're eating and try the other type, and maybe you will like it. It's just a thought. So, like I said, it's a very basic recipe with pepper and thyme and rosemary and onions and garlic and all of that good stuff in there, and potatoes. If you're not a fan of potatoes, I have actually switched turnips out in this recipe, and actually found it quite enjoyable too. So, if you like turnips, you can switch out your potatoes for turnips in this. Um, so, just a fun way to kind of play with the recipe and make it your own. So I get all of my spices into my container, and I'm trying to give you guys an overhead shot so you will see kind of what's going into it, because you never realize how much you don't like your kitchen or until you start canning in it or making videos about canning in it or trying to do anything in it and make a video, because my kitchen is definitely not set up for this. So I was trying to give you guys um, an overhead view of what was going in the pot. So there's my lamb going in with all my veggies and my goodness, and we're going to come in and add some beef broth, which I actually had already canned up, so I'm just opening those jars and pouring those in. You can do dual meats in this one too. So if you wanted to do lamb and beef or lamb and chicken or beef and chicken, those work really well too. So I've really taken this recipe and swapped it out. Um, so I've got a basic a basic bottom right to the recipe, and then I kind of add in the different meats to play with it. And you can swap out beef stock for chicken stock too, depending on what you have. If you're using red meats, probably best to stick with red meat broths, but again, I've canned chicken broth and beef and it's turned out just fine. So just adding some water to it. Like I said, you'll see the full recipe below, and we're going to stir this and we're going to let this simmer for about 20 minutes. Now, if you saw, there's actually bay leaves in this one, and I am going to take the bay leaves out of this one before I can it if I happen to run across them, just because they are going to simmer beforehand. And so once it has simmered for the 20 minutes and gotten good and hot, I'm going to take that and put it in my hot jars. If you see, I actually have my fruit steamer set up just kind of with a low boil underneath it, keeping my jars hot. So that way I don't have to like rush to get this done while my jars are still hot. And then my canner is currently heating up over there. So everything is hot food, hot jars, hot canner. So that way we don't have to worry about any cracks or issues because we're taking something cold and putting it hot, or vice versa. So what I usually do is I will ladle out the veggies and the goodness, and then from there I will put some broth over the top of it and then move it around and stir out all the air bubbles and see how much my headspace has dropped on this one, because the meat is not completely done and will continue to make its own juices when we're canning it. I leave about 1.5 inches headspace on this one, so that way if it creates any more, then we don't have a siphon issue or anything like that of where we've got too much broth and we have overboil or any catastrophes later. So we're just now going to top off our jars and get them nice and full, and then we'll put our tops on and then move over to putting items in the canner. Now, I knew that this recipe that I currently have makes 7 quarts, which would be 14 pints, and my canner holds 16 pints. So I actually threw extra broth in, and I'm going to can up 2 additional pints of just the broth from this in with this canning mix. So that way later, if I wanted to, I can actually take that broth and make a rice with it and then stir the rice in for a starch on starch to kind of change the recipe up too. So like I said, there's very many different ways that you can do this recipe to kind of keep it new and exciting, especially with teenagers, because they will always find something not to like about it, especially my girls. So we're just going to put the bands on hand tight again, as you see here. So I want to show you the second level in this because in the last video, so you start in the center when you're doing that second level and you just kind of keep adjusting. You want to make sure that there's space between your jars and they're not sitting on top of each other. I did notice in this one that my bottom started to shift. My separator started to shift, and so I had to reach in there and adjust it. So you just want to make sure that it's sitting directly on those jars so that way it holds up. And so we're going to get all the jars in here and we're going to process this one for 75 minutes at 15 pounds pressure for my elevation, but please check where your elevation is. And now, because we're going to be in the kitchen for at least 75 minutes to 90 depending, we're going to start making some biscuits for our freezer. So now that I have my timer going, I'm trapped in the kitchen probably for the next hour and a half. So this is where I like to actually multitask. And I noticed for some of my easy dinner meals, I was out of my frozen biscuits and love this recipe. It's very basic, very simple, and you can literally make your biscuits. You can freeze them so you know everything that's in them. And then when it comes time for you to eat them, you can pull them out, put them on your baking sheet, and transfer them into a cold oven. And while the oven is heating up to the temperature, your biscuits are going to defrost and they're going to cook. So not a lot of thought process when it comes time later. Very easy, very simple for us to be able to have fresh biscuits. Now, I'm only going to prep probably about a couple weeks worth because I don't like to put too much in there and have them get freezer burnt or anything like that. Because again, like I'm looking probably a couple months out on this, and we don't have biscuits at every meal, right? They will still stay in your freezer for quite some time. I'm going to put the full recipe below of everything, but this is pretty much just flour, baking soda, and salt in my dry ingredients. And then what we're going to do, now I learned now, when I made biscuits the first time, a long time ago, it said cut your biscuits up very, very, very thin, or cut your butter up very thin, and then incorporate it, but don't over incorporate it. Now, if you've ever tried to mix butter into your biscuits, you know that trying to break it down with a fork is a pain. So what I started doing is I freeze my butter and I grate it. So then it's so much easier to incorporate into my flour mix. So we're going to go for a half a cup of butter, grated up into our biscuits. It's going to be nice. Then we don't have to overwork this dough, because biscuits is one of those, the more you work the dough, the tougher your biscuits are going to be. Just watch your knuckles. Your cheese grater will eat them. See? See how easy that is? For me, it just, not having to sit here and smash butter with a fork in my bowl is life-changing. So all we're going to do now is we're going to take our butter, which is still cold. We're going to mix it in with our flour. This is, so it calls for buttermilk, a cup of buttermilk in this. If you don't have buttermilk, you can actually take a cup of milk and add a teaspoon of lemon juice to it to kind of give it that buttermilk curd. I mean, if you're making butter that day, well, obviously make biscuits at the same time. So we're just going to pour this in. And then it calls for a tablespoon of water. So we're going to put that in. And it's going to be a wet dough to start out with. Again, we're not trying to overwork this dough. We're just trying to get it all to incorporate in together, knowing that our hands are going to get dirty. Now this out of the way. So once we have it all in there, what we're going to do is clean up our work area a little bit. I've already got my pan over here for my biscuits. And again, we're freezing these, but if you were going to cook them fresh, I'll put below like what you would do for that as well. Now I go ahead and I put mine down on parchment paper because, well, I make a lot of soap over here and I don't want soap in my biscuits. Not recommended. And then we're just gonna, I'm gonna see if I can get it into a ball before I bring it out. It's just easier to transfer it. Now you're going to want to put it on a floured surface. And then what you're going to do, because this dough is so soft and you're not trying to overwork it, you're just going to flatten it out. And you're going to build layers into your biscuits. So once you get it at a good evenness, now if you wanted to, you could use the rolling pin. I just find it soft enough I don't have to. You should still be able to see chunks of butter in your dough. That's how you know you haven't overworked your dough. And then what you're going to do is you're going to fold in. You're going to fold in. You're going to flip. And you're going to start to build it back out again. And you do this about 3 times to build your layers. I'm stretching and folding again. Fold over, flip. So you're going for a nice thickness. Again, we're not kneading, we're just working the dough. You can double this, triple it, whatever you want to do, whatever you need to do for whatever you're trying to prep. Like I said, I'm just doing a small amount because I have a couple meals coming up that I want biscuits with, but considering with work and everything else, I might not feel like making biscuits. So then you're going to take your biscuit cutter if you have one. If you don't, a simple ring will work as well from one of your canning jars. So then you're just going to take and you're going to cut. Do not twist. Fight the urge to twist. You can shake, but don't twist. If you twist, then you're locking your biscuits in. When you lock your biscuits in, they don't rise as well. And believe me, everything in you wants to twist. You just take them. And you put them on your pan. And these will take a couple hours to freeze. That's why I usually try to pair them with anytime I'm canning something. So it's all kind of done at the same time and I can sit down at night. Everything's put away. Again, you're just going to work your dough out again. And you're just going to work this until you have all your biscuits made, continuing to do the same process, kind of folding into it, stretching it back out. This is why you don't want to overwork them, because you do kind of work them a little bit as you're making them. And then once you fill your tray up, if you've made a double batch, triple batch, whatever, you can put another piece of parchment paper over the top of it and continue to layer it so you can stick it into your freezer if you wanted to. And then you always end up with this, one wonky biscuit. But I'm not a waste type of person, so I just make it about as biscuit shaped as I possibly can, knowing that's going to be about the same size as the rest of them. And then throw it in, right? For home biscuits, they don't need to be pretty biscuits. They just need to taste good. So I'm going to throw these in the freezer. We're going to wait for our canner to finish. I actually have some couple of salves to throw together, some deodorant. So again, like when I'm doing my canning, I try to plan as many preps that I can do at the same time. Like if fruit was in season and I was pressure canning, I would also put some fruit, right, in my fruit saver too, right? You're trying to get as much time out of being in the kitchen as you possibly can, right? For me, Sundays is usually the day that I can really kind of bulk do anything, right? I usually stock up on my soaps at that time. I usually stock up on my preps at that time. I usually work through my meal programs because it's the only day that I have a full 10 to 11 hours that I can kind of devote to getting things the way they need to be. And in doing this, right, it makes it to where by the end of the week, right, I've got easy soups on the shelf that I can just heat up on the nights that it's just too tiring to do anything else. So I'm going to get these in the freezer, and then when everything's done, we'll kind of pull it all together. Okay, so these have finished processing. And so they ended up going for 15 pounds pressure for 75 minutes because of where I live. But again, make sure you check your elevation. And then our biscuits, I have these in my baggie. So they will go in the freezer, and then I can take them out as needed for meals. Again, I find this very easy because if only 3 people are going to be eating dinner, I can pull out the biscuits needed for 3 people. I can open up the cans of stew needed for that amount of people. And of course, if somebody happens to drop by last minute, I can always pull out more or change mine. With teenagers, they're always coming and going, stopping by, bringing friends. You never really know who's eating at your table. So I find this one really easy. You can switch out, like I said, you can switch out any type of meat that you want to put in. If you're not a fan of lamb, or if you want to do beef or chicken or whatever, the recipe works really well for all of those. So I hope you enjoyed watching this process. Thank you for stopping by, and have a great day.